Well, hello and welcome back to Jones Financial Talk. This is Nick Jones from Jones and Associates Premier Financial Solutions. Listeners, if you'd like more information about what you hear on this awesome show today, you can find that by just going to our website at jonesfinancialtalk.com. And while on that website, we have a dedicated radio page that Mr. Tony Shore and I create. All of our programs are also available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Google Podcasts and Amazon Music. And so lots of different mediums for you to use there. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out, give us a call, or also just request through the website any specific topics that you'd like for us to cover. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some things that can come up in your retirement planning that I've worked with many people on that have provided unfortunate situations. And so these are going to be some possibly, mistakes that you maybe should avoid or should think about before they happen while you're doing some retirement planning. But before I do that, Mr. Tony Shore, how you doing this week, buddy?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thanks for having me on the show. I've had a good week. I have two daughters and they both had birthdays last week. So
As did I.
Yeah, it was your birthday as well. We mentioned this, and yeah, my youngest daughter is the fifth. My oldest daughter is the third. So third, and then on the fourth is my youngest daughter's boyfriend, who she's been with for a while. It's his birthday, so we celebrated all three.
Nice.
How about you? How did you celebrate your birthday?
Well, the funny thing that you just mentioned there, Tony, is so my birthday is November 2nd.
Yeah.
My dad, for some reason, sometimes thinks my birthday is November 4th, depending on the year. So my parents came to town and they were here from the 2nd to the 5th. So he made sure that he made sure that the date was going to fall in between the visiting hours and times that they came. But we had a great time and just enjoyed our family for a couple extra days. And my boys were actually out of school. So we had a great time.
Good. You don't look any older.
Well, I'm getting there. I can tell you that. I'm feeling older every year.
You are not. You're a young spring chicken yet. Well, hey, Nick, thanks for having me on the show. I know we have a great one lined up today. We're going to talk about making sure you don't make costly mistakes. You want to make sure you have a successful retirement. You don't want your retirement to become a horror story because you make financial planning mistakes before you get there, right?
That's right. And actually, I was talking about this specific topic for a radio show with my dad. My dad was a financial advisor for 30 years, and he did a radio show for many of those, as you remember. And so we were talking about, in the last 5 years or so, as people come into the office, new prospects that are going to retire, what are the types of things that they should avoid? And what are things that have happened that maybe I could share on the show today? And, the obvious first one is just not saving enough for retirement. That's a huge danger, but it's so serious. About a third of Americans polled, about 35%, are not saving enough on a regular basis for retirement. And so this is something that is easily changed if you make it a priority early in life. And I'll give you an example of that. My dad, when I was very young, got my first job, said, "Son, the first thing you need to consider is paying yourself first for the long term." And I'm like, "Well, what does that mean, Dad?" And he's like, "Well, take 10% of every paycheck you get and just put it away for yourself long term for a rainy day or for retirement." And when I was younger, I'm like, "I don't need that money. We don't need to do that."
Right.
But I'll tell you what, if you look at some compounding interest numbers and you do that even at a very, very small amount to start, you're going to be so far ahead when you decide to retire, possibly even be able to retire early as a result of it. So that's the biggest first kind of blunder to try to make sure that you avoid, Tony, for sure.
Well, I wish I had put away 10% starting at my first job until now. Hindsight is 2020, and I know you hear this from a lot of people who come in and talk to you about their finances. Oh, if only I had known this back then, or if only I had done this back then and started saving when I was younger and right out of college or right out of school, whenever you get your first full-time job. If you put away 10%, you'd be set.
Yep.
Right now.
Well, and think about this, Tony. If you think about just an employee and an employer, I was just thinking about this as we were talking, the combined amount of Social Security tax that's put away on people's behalf is about 12.5%, right? It's 6 for the employee and 6 for the employer. And that's the government standard to be able to then pay you some pension, say $2,000 or $1,500 or $3,000 a month when you retire in your mid 60s. And so that goes to kind of show you how those numbers can compound.
Yeah, they really can, and it really builds up. I mean, the power of compounding interest is huge. That's one thing you don't want to take for granted, and you need to understand. I know that's something you help people out with when they call you and talk to you about that. So, what else do we need to know about this, Nick?
Okay, so probably the number one thing that comes up that I want people to consider or avoid, unless they're talking to an advisor that's going to help them plan about this, is taking too many withdrawals too early in retirement. More
Uh,
often than not, Tony, people retire and they're used to making a certain amount of money. And when they retire, most people probably can survive on 75 to 80% of what they made before. But if you're not having that discussion, and I think we should spend some good time talking about my reasoning here. If
yeah.
you're not having that discussion with your advisor, this is a huge problem that you can run into.
It is. Obviously, taking too many withdrawals too soon can really derail somebody, and especially if they try to withdraw money from those retirement accounts before they're of retirement age or hit retirement.
Sure, because they could be taxed additionally or penalized, you know.
Yeah.
The difficult part here is, if you have a big bucket of money that you need to last, say 30 or 35 years into retirement for most people, and you start gouging a huge percentage of it up front to start with, say 10% or 15%, it just quickly changes what you then can draw long term off of that portfolio to maintain the value and make sure that you feel good and comfortable about how it's going to work. And so, Tony, one very, very important thing that I do with all of my clients and prospects, and we alter this on a very regular occasion, is income reporting. And I know we've talked about this on the show before, but a written income plan. If you have not gotten and seen a written income plan from your financial advisor, how do you know if the money's going to last? How do you know where it's going to come from? How do you know how it's going to be taxed? And how do you know how it's going to, help you try to figure out exactly how much you can draw to make it work? Everybody's situation is different, which we'll talk about right now, Tony, but that's a huge thing, just a written income plan.
Yeah. And that's something you do. I mean, when somebody comes into your office, this is the primary thing you help them figure out, right? Is how much they can spend in retirement. And that's critical. And when. It's not necessarily as much as how much you have, but when you have it too, right?
That's right. And you are correct. And so for most people, it's difficult to grasp where that money is going to come from. They know they've got a bucket of money that they can use for retirement, but they're not quite sure how that's going to be affected. And so we've talked lots of times, and I'll get into a lot of different options here, but we've talked lots of times about different buckets of money, right? You've got the qualified money, which is in your retirement accounts. You've got the Roth money, maybe that's not taxable when you decide to pull it out. Maybe you've got the non-qualified money or cash accounts as well. And those three different buckets of your investments are going to supplement what you're going to get either in Social Security or a pension. But more importantly than that, and having those options and talking through them, is having a plan in place that's tailored to exactly what you think you're going to do. And so let me give you a perfect example, Tony. A lot of people say, well, I'm going to retire and I'm going to live on 80% of what I originally was making before I retired. And I'm fine with that. And I'm going to have a great life and I'm going to just get a monthly paycheck along the way. And that's what I call an even dispersion of how much money we're going to have to pay that person. It's a set percentage. Maybe they're comfortable with 4 or 5 or 6% of their nest egg that we're going to draw down every year to supplement their income with other sources like Social Security and pensions. Okay. And then what's our job? Our job is to try to replenish and replace the percentage that they're pulling out. That's the most basic premise of an income plan. If you're drawing 4% out and I make you 4, you never touch the principal, and boom, over a 30-year period, you're probably going to grow your retirement assets a little bit more and have more money as a nest egg to give to people as a legacy than when you first retired. That's just very, very basic, right?
Right.
But there's tons of other situations. I mean, lots of my clients come to me and they're just brutally honest with themselves. And they say, look, I'm going to be the most healthy for the first 10 years of retirement between the ages of 60 and 70 or 65 and 75. And my husband and I, or my wife and I, have always wanted to just travel or go experience this or that or whatever it is. And so the point I'm making here is they want to spend more money right away in
Yeah.
retirement. And the answer to that is not always no, you can't do it because you're taking too large of withdrawals. The answer is let's figure out how much of a withdrawal you can take for the next 10 years to accomplish that goal. But then more importantly, what are you going to have to reduce your income to 10 years from now
Right.
to be able to continue to make the money last? And then very importantly, on top of that, Tony, is will you have enough money 10 years from now to be able to actually do that with inflation and different metrics that we have to consider? And so I build many different types of income plans. One of those, like we just talked about, is more money up front, right? And then there are some people that have the goal that's opposite to that. And what I mean by that is they know that their parents have lived a very long time. Like, gosh, your grandpa that passed away at
Yeah.
101, 102.
Yep. 101. Grandpa
So
Bob.
longevity. Whenever I sit down with people, I ask them, tell me about the longevity of your parents, because although we never know what's going to happen, I mean, that is a good gauge of, your genes and how that's going to last. And so if their parents lasted into their 90s and they know that they are as well, or could, maybe they want to back end the income play for later because they know that as they get older, say between 85 and 95, they're going to need some long-term care, right? And so they say, I don't need as much money today, but I'm going to need a lot more for the last 10 years of my life. How do we build the plan to make sure I still won't run out, even if I come and take big chunks out for the last 10 years of my life, for instance?
Right. Yeah. And so longevity, your time horizon really make a difference. And that's something you have to look at. I mean, versus am I single with a terminal illness, or am I married with longevity? Everybody's situation has so many different variables. But you're used to doing this. You know what to look for, what to ask them about, in order to come up with a plan so they don't run out of money in retirement and are able to meet their goals, right?
Yeah, and it's just a math equation that you have to figure out, and you have to understand what buckets you're going to pull from to make this work efficiently. I mean, another option for an income plan is a legacy build. Where people say the most important thing to me is providing something for my grandkids or my
Yeah.
or my children, and so they want to be cognizant of that and build an income plan that's tailored to make sure that they can pull what they have to off, like with required minimum distributions, but not really dip more into that. And so depending on the income plan, we talked about 4 different options there. Depending on the option that you want to take, that's going to help you, your advisor, determine what types of solutions you should consider, right? To be able to make that plan work. Everybody assumes, look, my neighbors just made 10% return in the stock market. They own Apple stock or whatever. I got to do the same. Well, do you? If your goal is not anything like theirs, then why do we gauge ourselves against something like that? And really what it should be is when you go and sit down with your advisor, look them in the eye and say, I'm happy. Are you happy with the returns in my portfolio for my specific goals? Ask that question, because if you're making 10% a year or 4% a year, it's dependent wholly on what your goal is. I might say I'm extremely excited and happy about making 4% when the last person I sat down with just made 10, because you're in a totally different situation and what you need is the 4, not the 10. Because it can be on the flip side too, as we just experienced with a terrible downturn in the market in 2022, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. 2022 was not a great year for markets or bonds, and a lot of people make emotional decisions. But if you're working with a financial professional like yourself, a trusted financial professional, an advisor, a fiduciary who's going to look out for your best interests and help you get that plan in place and then stick to it. And, that's why we need to worry about these, or why people worry about it. They don't have to. You don't have to go it alone, is my point.
Yep.
But I think it's really important that people know how sacred those retirement accounts are, and they're for retirement. And you really have to be careful about when you pull money out. And I'm glad you made that point. You really stressed it. That's good.
The people that consider that especially right away when they first retire and understand what their goals are, typically have more money left at the end because their conservative approach is being updated. So this is not something that I create one time and we never talk about it again. This is the topic of almost every review.
Sure.
Tony, where are you income wise? Where have you been? How happy are you with that? What types of things can you do and can't you do? And what do we need to, alter as a result of that?
Right.
And so we've talked about, so far we've talked about, not saving enough up front, but then withdrawing too much. And kind of one thing that goes in line with this income plan that I've discussed is the third thing that people need to really be concerned about, which is taxation. Right.
Yeah.
And I talk about this a lot on the show, but think about the fact that in 2026, tax rates are going to revert back to what they were prior to 2017. And a lot of people might say, well, okay, why does that matter? Well, we had significant tax cuts in the Trump era tax days, is what
Yeah.
people call this, right? For an extended period of time, 7-8 years. And what's going to happen for a married couple that makes $150,000 a year? Okay, their tax rate's going to jump by almost 14%
Wow.
in 2026 if we revert back to those numbers. So if you're not thinking about how taxes are going to change your retirement and erode your savings, you're doing yourself a huge disservice,
Yeah. A lot of people think, oh, I'll be in a lower tax bracket when I retire. I won't have a job, so I won't have that income. I won't have to worry about taxes. But all those retirement accounts, those tax deferred retirement accounts, are going to come due when you start taking that money out. You are going to have to pay taxes on it, and even your Social Security can be taxed, right?
Definitely. So in Oregon, it's not taxed by the state, but it is still taxed federally for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
the tax rate will change when that happens, depending on the bracket you're in. And the reason why that's important to have a discussion about is not because you can necessarily completely avoid taxes, but you sure can put yourself in a better situation. And
Yeah.
so
What's the solution?
we've talked a lot about, Roth conversions, for instance. I literally just sat down with a client yesterday, and this was a huge topic. They said, Nick, look, we are 75. We've been retired 10 years. We've taken required minimum distributions off of our portfolio this entire time, and our IRA is basically still the same value as it was. I said, yep. And they said, well, the point is we don't really need a lot of this. We want to convert some of this into something better for our kids. And I said, well, we've got 2 more years. We got 2 more tax years to start doing Roth conversions, and we know what the actual tax bracket's going to be. We have no idea if we're going to revert back to where it was in 2017 and have a 14% increase like we just mentioned. But if we did, we're losing a huge opportunity today by not doing a Roth conversion. So what do? You look at the tax bracket you're in, and you look at how much room you have to get to the next tax bracket level federally, and calculate how much money you can convert for the next 2 years to move that money from the bucket of qualified IRA 401k plans to the Roth side. And the Roth side never requires you to take a required minimum distribution. You never pay taxes on any of it going forward. And so people say, okay, well, that's fine. I got to pay a ton of taxes today to get the money in the Roth. That's true. But when you take the money out of that IRA, if you don't move it to the Roth, you're going to pay the taxes anyways. So if you move it to the
going to
Roth,
pay the taxes at some point, but why not pay them now when the taxes are low, is what I hear you saying. And then if you want to pass that on to your children, that money comes out tax-free. It grows tax-free. They pay no taxes on the growth or the principal in a Roth IRA, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And so, if you plan that properly, we have Roth conversion reports that we use all the time with our clients to kind of look at the taxation situation that everybody's in. And that's a huge one. It's something that you can do to put yourself in a better situation, depending on what your income goals and income plan is. It all gets back to that written plan that we've talked about, Tony.
Sure. So a Roth works not only for you if you want to pull money out later, tax-free, and want it to grow tax-free, but you can pass that tax-free benefit on to your children, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they still will be required to pull that money out of the account, but they might not have to pay any taxes on it compared to in a traditional IRA.
Right.
The other big thing to avoid is to not specifically plan your Social Security distributions, accurately. You and I talk a lot about this. We have the Social Security maximization report that outlines different ages when you would take this money and how that can work to your advantage. But what we don't talk a lot about is how, depending on what your other assets are and what your income plan is and what your goals are, maybe you should take Social Security earlier or later, just depending on your specific situation. All of these things are tied together and go together, right? When I'm sitting down with a client, I'm talking about all these different sources of income, when we're going to pull them. And then they always say, when people are not retired yet, they're like, I don't really understand the logistics of how I get money out and how we talk about this. And I say, well, that's why you're supposed to sit down and have quarterly reviews with your advisor, because every quarter something's going to change. And I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you the same questions every quarter. Tony, how's your income? Has it changed? Can you live on it? Do you need more? And all of those things determine if we take Social Security at a different time, what accounts we draw down, if we do Roth conversions. All of this ties together, but all of it is based on one real thing: your income goal and the income plan that you start with. Big thing there.
Well, and Social Security, people might think, well, I can't live on Social Security, or that's not going to cover that much. It's still a fairly large portion for most people, and it's the foundation because it's a known quantity. So you want to make that Social Security amount as much as possible. You want to get the biggest Social Security check you can
Yep.
for your situation, and that means you have to look at when is the best time for you to personally file to get the most out of Social Security, right? Because you
Exactly.
don't want to lock in a low amount and live till you're 90 and have lost a lot because you locked in a lower amount, correct?
Totally.
Yeah. And what's the solution there? It's having that Social Security maximization report run, right? I mean,
And it
there's
has
no
to tie in
cost.
with that income plan for sure, Tony, too.
Yeah.
You got to understand the sources of income, where you're pulling them from, when you need them, and why. That's the most important thing. And you're right. Those Social Security maximization reports go hand in hand with my income planning reports as well.
Yeah, excellent. And if our listeners out there want to know when the best time for them to file or what their spousal benefits might be, all they have to do is pick up the phone and set up a consultation with you, correct?
Yep. Or if they just go to our website at jonesfinancialtalk.com, they can request that right on there for
That's
sure.
right. Just go to jonesfinancialtalk.com and all the resources are there on the website. Great. And you can even set up an appointment on the main website there with Jones and Associates. You've got a great team there, and there's no charge, no obligation for that consultation. I encourage our listeners to do that. Now, what's something else that we need to know to make sure our retirement isn't a horror story?
Okay, two main things I'm thinking of here that we should discuss. The first is family. Okay. So, what I mean by that is, don't just give all of your retirement assets away too quickly. It's very easy for family members to come to you when you have a huge nest egg and say, let me borrow some money. Or for you on the flip side to say, let me start giving some money away to whoever needs it that's in my family for whatever reason. That
Yeah.
is something that can drastically derail your situation. And the reason why I mention that is, if you give too much money away, you have a much smaller base to make interest on, right?
True.
And so you know that if you pass away, most of those people are going to get the money anyways. But if you give it away too prematurely, then you can be in a situation where you're later in life really suffering as a result of that. So that's a huge one. Resist helping family too often with their own finances. You have to balance your own finances and your emotional and physical health and how you're helping others, on a regular basis. You can't, you have to enjoy yourself and not just do everything to help them, even though you're in a situation where you can help them. That's a
Right.
difficult thing for a lot of people to understand, Tony. Um, and then another big one that you've talked to me a lot about, like with your mom, for instance, is healthcare.
Oh,
This is something that could hugely change your specific situation. If you don't have correct healthcare coverages and planning to know what your assets are how your assets are going to look and what you're going to do with them, that can throw things off in this income plan drastically, clearly.
yeah. Yeah, I think it really could. I know that healthcare costs, we talked about taxes earlier, and then healthcare costs. Those are two of the biggest expenses you're going to have in retirement, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, and long-term care is outrageous. In fact, I just talked with the facility where my mom is at, and she was going through the state, but now that my dad inherited some things, now some of it has to start coming back out of pocket for that, and it's not cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, it's expensive.
Definitely. Definitely. And so the point of all of this whole conversation is proper planning and discussing this with somebody like your financial advisor. I've told you already, and the statistics don't lie, that almost 70% of the people in our country don't save enough for retirement. And also, what they don't do is properly plan for when they're going to retire, where they're going to get their income from. They don't think too much about their Social Security and when they're going to draw it. They don't think about healthcare coverages, or how all that's going to affect them. And so there's a lot that goes into this, Tony. You and I have talked a lot on our show about the Knowledgeable Retiree, a book that I wrote just a year ago. And inside the book, I talk about many of these different things, the kind of the 4 or 5 pronged approach of things that you need to sit down and talk with somebody about before you actually retire. Or if you are retired and it's not too late, you should discuss these things, because the idea is, if you're sitting down with a financial advisor that is asking the correct questions, you're going to leave the meeting with way more information than you started with, and hopefully a plan and some reassurances to help you achieve the goals that you need to. That's what this is all about. This is not, we're talking about a bunch of different obstacles that you should
Yeah.
avoid in your retirement planning. It's not like they can't be avoided. If you just talk with somebody, it can easily be worked out for sure.
There you go. Communication is the key, working with a financial professional. So, Nick, you mentioned your book. How can our listeners get a copy of that?
Sure thing. Well, if they just go to our website at jonesfinancialtalk.com, there's a little blurb about the book on there, and they can actually request it, and be happy to send you a signed copy for sure in the mail. It just kind of outlines many of the things that we've discussed today, but then in much more detail, many different parts of a financial plan and how that should work.
Excellent.
And it's just a great, great thing. I built it because when somebody starts at our firm as a prospect, we talk about all these different topics before they invest any of the money with us. And this is a multi-step approach. It's many meetings. And the point is, after we get done, they're like, that was great, but I don't remember half the stuff that we talked about. So I give them a copy of the book to say, here are the things that we covered. Here are the things that we need to continue to think through at different stages of retirement. Use it as a tool.
Yeah. There you go. Well, great show today. We're out of time. Nick, good stuff. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. That does it for today's episode of Jones Financial Talk.